Well, welcome to Farabi Future Forum. With us, David. He's one of the founders of Succession Wells, and we're here to talk about AI and the legal space, and actually like learn more about his part of the world. How you doing, Dave?
Good. How are you?
All's good. Well, we have Ryan also. We're
Hi
gonna
there.
have like a really interesting conversation. All right, so if you don't mind, Dave, do you mind if we start with a little bit of background? I know you're a practicing partner and you have your own, also a startup, an idea that you want to get out there. So yeah, would love to learn more about you.
Sure. So I'm Canadian. I grew up in a place called Hamilton, Ontario. It's about an hour outside of Toronto. Born and raised in Canada, went to a university and law school there. I'm dating myself, but that was about 20 years ago now. I've been practicing law for 15 and I've been a partner at my firm for 5. So I've sort of been through, the trenches of the legal profession from start to finish. And there was a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and it's been a rewarding career, a challenging career, and I still love it to this day. But what brought me here today is that I got to a point. As I said, I made partner 5 years ago, and you start to get into a rhythm. I'm someone who always likes a challenge, always wants to learn something new. So once I sort of got to that finish line, so to speak, for my normal career, I started basically, my mind got to work on ideas for what's next. And that's sort of what brought me here today.
You saw an opportunity, right?
Exactly.
So when we talked a little bit offline, there was like a really interesting fact regarding like you being the lawyer IT guy. So on the tech side, talk to us like how do you got more into technology first?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always been into tech. Back in high school, it's the only formal training I ever had was I took like a computer science class back in high school where we were learning to code. And unfortunately, the teacher, for whatever reason, decided that Pascal was going to be the language he was going to teach us in, which is like, it's like learning Latin, right? It's completely useless in the real world. But I guess his logic was, it's so basic, so fundamental. It'll treat you or teach you those fundamentals that you need to go on in this field. I absolutely loved it. I would stay up all night working on projects just for the sake of it, even though I knew I was going to get an A anyway. The only person in the school who was better than me at it was someone who went on to found a startup that got bought by Facebook when he was like 20. And this is back in the day before that was like a common thing, right? So, needless to say, I had an aptitude for it. I loved programming. I loved anything tech related, but I guess I learned at an early age that that was that's having fun. That's my hobby. And that's not what I'm supposed to study for history class. I'm supposed to study for English or whatever. Right. And so from an early age, I think, built up a bit of a fence around that kind of thing. And I told myself, I'm going to focus on a more stable career path. Believe it or not, back then, this is the early 2000s, going into tech was not how you got rich back then, right? You wanted to go become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. So the way I perceived it back then was by the time I got to college, sort of shut down that side of my interest. But I guess it was dormant because when I started practicing law, uh, really early on, this is, I think, 2012, 2013, it became very apparent to me quickly just sort of how antiquated the workflows were, like in the law firm. My favorite was I never had a dictaphone, right? So lawyers still to this day, they use dictaphones, where it, harkens back to the 80s or whatever when you had professional typists. And as a lawyer, you didn't type, right? You didn't know how to do that. So you had a full-time employee who you paid to listen to recordings of you to type up your letters. And then subsequently that became emails. And there's still plenty of lawyers to this day who literally dictate all of their emails and have a human being transcribe it and type out the email. Really early on, when I saw
But out
things
of
like,
curiosity, just out of curiosity, so is it a matter of accuracy, like that they have a person that transcribes and writes them, or is it to audit? Like, what's the idea?
honestly, I mean, hopefully none of my colleagues are listening, but honestly, I think it's like an ego thing.
I ego thing.
It's like I got the corner office, I can afford to pay somebody a full-time salary because I'm not going to type myself. I mean, in my view, I could type faster than I could speak, and I'm not going to, have that sort of inefficiency in my practice. But B, I just thought the way I speak to someone, the way I'm speaking to you now, is necessarily the way I want to write a letter, especially a legal letter. So anyway, that jumped out at me as a very obvious sort of antiquated way of doing things. And early on, I started noticing a lot of them. So right off the bat, I sort of was a little different, so to speak, in terms of how I wanted to practice law, how I went about it, how I interacted with my staff. A lot of what we do, I'm a corporate lawyer. I do, um, aside from wills and estates, I do a lot of merger and acquisition deals, helping founders incorporate startups and do their partnership agreements or operating agreements, things like that. So a lot of that stuff is not that it's filling in the same forms all the time, but there's certain degree of a repetition to the documents you're using,
Process.
the documents you're pumping out. And a lot of the actual ground level drafting is done by legal staff, right? Legal assistants, paralegals. And again, as a young junior lawyer in the firm, we didn't get our own dedicated assistants back then. So we sort of had to fight, not fight, but it was a bit of a tug of war for that resource, right? For the sort of shared team assistance. So right off the bat, I started figuring out how can I sort of automate some of this busy work a little bit. And this is, again, pre AI. This is like 2012, 2013. So it's pre AI. There's no, Zapier or N8N or anything like that. This was very crude Microsoft coding that I was teaching myself with, basic and some of the built in Microsoft Office automated fields that you can use. And basically, I generated over time a series of these precedents that my firm still uses to this day. I mean, again, they're very crude, but they don't have that pretty front end to them. I'm at the end of the day, I'm not a software developer, but they work and we still use them to this day. So that was sort of my first foray into bringing tech to my job as a lawyer to make me not only better at what I do, or sorry, not only more efficient at what I do, but also better, because doing it that way meant I don't have to worry about spelling mistakes. I don't have to worry about the multitude of other errors that are just human nature, right? People make mistakes. Even the best legal assistant or lawyer is going to make a typo or a mistake every now and then. But with these automations, I knew that as long as I have my underlying template right, the output is going to be right, at least when it comes to stuff like that. So it made me better at what I do. It made me more efficient. And as time has gone on, flash forward 10 years, 15 years, it's a whole new world out there now, right? With AI and so many of the automations that are built in. So, I mean, at our firm, I'd like to think we're a bit more forward facing than many, at least
Hmm.
many mid-sized firms like us. So we have, because of security rules and we work with a lot of banks, and so you have to have very strict security measures and privacy protection measures in place. So we work fully within a Microsoft ecosystem. So we at the firm use Copilot, Power Automate to automate various workflows, et cetera. And it's something we're just starting to dip at the firm anyway, just starting to dip our toes into. And I think probably, we're a very good example of what's happening across the industry is firm lawyers are just starting to dip their toes into this stuff. It's a bit of a delicate balance when it comes to automations and AI in law because the stakes are so high. If
Hmm.
AI, I'm drafting an article or a recipe about how to bake a cake, and I use AI to write up my article to improve the SEO or whatever, and it screws up the cake recipe and hallucinates or something, people get a bad cake. If I try to draft an important legal document with AI and it hallucinates or drifts,
It's
then
higher stakes.
somebody's losing their livelihood or a multi-million dollar deals they're through or something. It's a very delicate balance. There's already been horror stories in the industry about lawyers just basically throwing clearly ChatGPT generated stuff for court documents or whatever else out there and being hauled up before disciplinary committees and things like that. It's really disrupting the industry right now because we want to use it. We want to improve how we do things and stay modern, but it's such a delicate balance. And, it's it's disrupting everything. Even something as simple as, E&O insurance, our errors and omissions or malpractice insurance. There's even talk within that insurance industry of like how, the risks to them associated with lawyers going and using these tools. Are you
Mhm.
a lawyer that uses AI or not? Because if you are, yeah, that's great for you. Maybe your practice is more efficient, but you're a higher risk to us as the insurer, right? So it's just an example of how across the industry it's really changing things.
I actually
On
was, yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Ryan.
Well, I wanted to catch that comment he made about the early technology evangelism that you were doing. So you were sort of the tech evangelist, very regulated, human-centric industry, which I think that tension exists now more than ever. Like, as you mentioned, as the AI starts to disrupt that industry that is highly regulated. What advice would you have? Because I would imagine this relates to a lot of people. Okay, I'm sure there's a lot of lawyers right now that are these tech evangelists like you were 20 years ago in your industry who are trying to adopt these types of technological measures, which could be in research, it could be in automation, or it could be in ideation. And they're probably coming up with that autoimmune response, just like how you were mentioning. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of reasons why people are going to just gatekeep. So what advice would you have for them? What worked, what didn't? Because it sounds like if you stuck solutions from 15 years ago that are still in production or so still being in use, you obviously figured out a way to navigate that autoimmune response. So any tips for people now, lawyers now that are in these evangelist sort of AI championship roles in their highly regulated human-centric industries that are coming up with a lot of pushback? What might work? What worked for you? What didn't work? Any tips for those folks?
Well, this advice I'm about to give applies across all industries, in my opinion. Law is a great example of it because, as I said, the stakes are high. But no matter even if you're writing that cake recipe, the same principle is going to apply here, which is you need a human gatekeeper at the end, right? You need to. I think the biggest mistake people make when it comes to everybody's so excited about AI right now. Everybody wants to use ChatGPT for everything, et cetera. But people don't fully understand or appreciate the limitations. What is it good at? What is it not good at? It's not, it makes mistakes. It hallucinates. It does all kinds of crazy stuff. And if for those of us who work with this modern technology a lot, we're well aware of that, right? Because the more you work with it, the more you see these things. You see the mistakes, you see the drifting, whatever. You learn over time. It's actually a skill, right? Prompting AI is a skill that can be learned and can be taught. It's not just say whatever you want. There's a certain architecture to how you use it, both in terms of getting the best output out of the AI and also in terms of knowing what the limitations are of it and not just assuming it can do everything a human can do because it can't. It's like a very, very smart human with absolutely no common sense sometimes, right? And so I think the main mistake lawyers and others make, and this is what results in pushback against, I've never called myself an evangelist in this regard, but I'll take the term today. What gives the pushback is when you hear those horror stories about the lawyer who submitted a court document that was drafted by ChatGPT and was making up case law that didn't exist, right? Making up cases that never happened. The problem there was the lawyer overestimated the powers of the AI and underestimated how much AI sometimes just doesn't listen to you, right? You've seen those memes of people keep feeding the same image back in and saying change absolutely nothing and how it drifts over enough iterations. So A, it doesn't listen to you all the time. And B, it really wants to please you, right? The AI is programmed to try to please the user, to try to give the user what it thinks the user wants. And that's what causes it to make stuff up and drift. And so if you don't understand those limitations, that's how you get yourself into hot water. So to answer your question, the short answer, that was the long-winded tangent. The short answer is you need a human gatekeeper at the end for everything you do. Those automations that I created 10, 15 years ago, I would never dream of pumping out those documents and just sending them off. I would never dream of such a thing, right? They are a tool to speed up a certain element, a certain sort of busy work or tedious element of the job. That's what AI is good at. That's what automations are good at, is take something that is maybe a tedious component of the job and automate that, but make sure at the end of it, you have a human gatekeeper who's going to look at what it is and make sure it makes sense. and fix it. It should always only be treated as a first draft.
I agree because we always talk about that human in the loop concept. And the ironic thing is, like, if you don't, we haven't, like, in engineering, the idea of shift left. You try to, as much as possible, do the testing and the quality assurance and making sure everything works. Or if something not doesn't work, you want to catch it in your own house, not when it's out there, right? So human in the loop is going to happen, whether it's in your house or someone else, like the case that you talked about, the lawyer. He sends a document filled with case numbers that don't exist. Someone made a human in the loop kind of situation right there and gave you feedback, but it was trouble. But then at that moment, it's not enough to actually just like make a bet on generative AI to give you the best quality. So I
The hard
totally
part is
agree.
people, they don't know what they don't know, right? Again, this is happening all the time now. So not a day goes by in my law practice now where a client doesn't give me something that clearly ChatGPT wrote that is flat out wrong, because the client doesn't, they don't know. They're not a lawyer. They don't understand the concepts. They think that the AI does. And so they'll take their issue or the legal document someone else has given them or whatever, they plug it into ChatGPT, it spits out a response or an analysis or a document, and then they at some point realize, wait a minute, something's off here, and then it comes to us, right? So to go back to the issue of how is AI sort of affecting or disrupting the legal industry, I think that's another big one. Is aside from lawyers navigating how we can integrate it into our practices in a way that makes sense and is safe, and there's also a profitability element to it, which I want to come back to. But there's that. But then there's also, what is it doing to the industry as a whole from the perspective of like the actual volume of legal work to be done? Um,
Mhm.
I I have no proof of this. I have no evidence, but my anecdotal sort of observation is that I think that the legal industry as a whole, probably like many industries, excuse me, is bleeding work to AI right now.
Mhm.
It's unseen loss, right? It's clients that never were, it's cases that never were. This maybe doesn't affect so much people in the litigation space. I think litigation lawyers, personal injury lawyers, etc., probably okay. Certainly those of us in the sort of corporate law, business law, real estate law, those areas where you're doing that sort of work, in my view, we have to be bleeding tons of work to ChatGPT at this point, because again, if I'm getting, at least a few times a week, a client coming to me with something that they tried to use, they're basically, admitting like, hey, I tried to use ChatGPT to avoid hiring you, right?
Yep.
And oftentimes they're like repeat clients who hire me a lot. They pay me a lot of money every year, but they're trying to keep their legal costs under control. They're a business; it makes sense, and so there's a certain threshold before they'll go to the lawyer with something, and they try to deal with things in house to the extent they can. And I think with AI now, where people hit that threshold of what they think they can handle on their own versus going to the lawyer for, that ceiling is rising.
And do you think that actually only just totally understand that it's like taking work out of this profession, but at the same time, is it advantageous for people who are really good at what they do and more specialized, that it gives them more work, since like the foundational work that anybody went to a lawyer to actually solve for a problem, now AI does?
So let me preface this by saying, I'm not trying to moralize that, right? I'm not saying that it's a bad
No,
thing
no,
that
no, no.
people. It's
I'm
actually,
actually
in many ways, it's a good thing, right? It's more access to justice. It's that small business owner that has to review their lease with their, big conglomerate landlord and can't afford to go hire a lawyer to do it. Better now that, yeah, maybe ChatGPT is not perfect, but better that than nothing, right? So
yep.
overall, I think it's a good thing for people, for the population as a whole.
So to rephrase my question in a different way, now they all these like AI companies, LLM companies are promoting this whole idea. This AI passed the bar exam. This AI passed the bar exam. Like, to people like, or not in the industry of law, is they're looking at it as like, okay, so in other words, he's at least, or that AI is a basic lawyer. And I'm making a huge assumption here. I'm just saying, like, it's passing a metric that lawyers actually try their best and study so much to actually pass, that it's passing and with ease. That's what they claim. So To me, that opens the door for a lot of this basic tasks or basic consultations that people, as you said, are using AI for, just like for a person to check their lease for their store or their home, instead of actually going for a person to consult with. But that brings up a powerful thing, which is now lawyers can specialize in a lot of things that AI can't specialize in because it's very specific use cases, just like personal injury or accidents, etc. Like there's more focus on specialization. So do you think there's an advantage like I'm seeing it, or no? Like this is like still more disadvantage than advantage to the industry?
I mean, I think at the present time, right now, snapshot in time, it's probably a disadvantage to the industry just because we're still trying to adapt, right? Like we're living in a horse and buggy world, and the automobile's just been invented, and there's an adaptation phase that we're in the middle of. I think as an industry, we will find a way after this disruption to make it make sense. But I think right now it's probably, well, it's overall probably just hurt it, bad for business, so to speak. But I think a point you do touch on there that's important is the further into your career you are, the more high level, specialized, experienced you are, the less this is going to affect you, right? It's those entry level jobs, it's those junior lawyer jobs that are sort of the most at risk. They're the ones who, when they get a new client, it's going to be a small business owner. It's going to be their neighbor or something. Building your practice from scratch in the early days of your career is very difficult. To get people to trust you when you've only been practicing for a year or two.
That was my next question too. You just set that up perfectly. I'm going to pivot because it's like you're sort of hitting the question like head on. So the question I had was precisely what you just mentioned: senior level versus junior level, and who's getting the most amplification off of the LLMs. And I want to take it back to an early study, I would call it, or a paper. I think it was Harvard Business Review. And this was very, very early in the days of GPT 3.5, maybe. So we're talking going back to 2023. And sort of this paper basically did some analysis on juniors versus seniors and who's getting the most lift off of the LLMs. And that paper concluded that it was the juniors that got a more significant lift than the seniors at the time. And that seemed like it made sense intuitively because you can one shot, if you don't know much about a subject, I can one shot the thing and all of a sudden I can copy paste and produce some sort of answer. Where a senior level person maybe didn't need to do that. So you're edging up on the senior level people. However, I always thought there was a flaw to this, and I think it's starting to reveal itself now. And I think you just alluded to it. Was that the senior level people at the time might have been more resistant to this? Like, wait, I don't need this thing to answer this simple question. I know the answers to this. And more than that, they might not have known how to use the tool properly. Like you mentioned, prompting is its own art. So how you use the LLMs can indicate how successful you are with them. And I think it took longer for the senior level people to really lean into how to use these tools. And I think now that thing inverted. I think senior level people are amplifying their output 3, 5, 10x over the junior level people, because I think the junior level people hit that plateau. You only have so much of your own domain knowledge and world model that you can only extract so much from the distribution of the LLMs versus the senior level people. So what I'm seeing in engineering is the senior level people, the senior engineers are getting a lot more value out of the LLMs than the junior level people. So I think that goes back to that human in the loop. And this was sort of my question, was that, and I think you sort of answered it, was that senior lawyers like yourself, people that have 15, 20 years experience, like badasses in the industry, I would imagine that they can amplify their abilities with the LLMs significantly more than a junior. And I would go further to say that if I was a corporation, I'm a Fortune 100, I'm a Fortune 500, and I have some big legal problems, some corporate problems, I would much rather have senior legal human plus LLM versus just senior legal human or just LLM. I want the multiplicative factor of that senior mind, that creative mind that digs into the nuance, it's thought about these problems for decades, plus the power of the retrieval of the LLM.
Yeah.
So I would say that is this what you're seeing? Is this sort of what you are seeing?
Again, from the perspective of inside the industry, what's good for us as an industry is different from what's good for you as the CEO of that Fortune 100 who needs to hire legal staff, right? From that perspective, yes, you're bang on. senior person to deal with the complexities, the nuances, the stuff only experience and that sort of human knowledge can really achieve, plus an LLM is, if he knows how to use it or she knows how to use it, is very, very powerful. That's the equivalent of what used to be that senior person plus a whole, stable of juniors that were going to cost your company a lot of money in terms of your HR budget for legal, right? So from that perspective, you're 100% right. And I'll give you a great example of how it's a small example, but a very easy to understand one of how it amplifies me, for instance. So often, legal cases can go on for years sometimes, right? And there's a lot of letters and emails and correspondence, and it builds up. And oftentimes there's some, communication or correspondence from some time in the past that you're trying to track down. Happens all the time. Historically, that was the job for like a junior, either a student or a really junior lawyer, was to sift through. I remember early in my career spending I had this one case that my boss put me on. I must have spent 2 days in like a dingy basement going through bankers' boxes of papers of every letter and email from this file that had been going on for like 5 years, that back then you would print all your emails. That was how you would store them for like the record, right? So it was printed emails, years worth. Boxes and boxes and boxes. My job was to go through these boxes in this dingy basement at, it's 11 o'clock at night and try to find, this needle in a haystack. That was a particularly bad example, but that kind of thing would happen all the time. And we get a junior to do it. Now, like my firm anyway, and we use, I'll give them a plug. We use a practice management system called Leap, and it has a built-in AI feature you're saving all of your emails and correspondence to the electronic file within their system. And at all times, their like internal LLM model is basically indexing all of those things. So now, whereas before, as the senior, if I have, some big meeting coming up or something's happening and I need an answer to this, what did we quote the client we were going to charge them for when we took on this file 3 years ago? Even something as simple as that. Whereas before, I would have had to pay a student or a junior lawyer a pretty decent hourly rate and, wait a couple of days possibly to get that answer, even if they're doing their best. I can now go into my program and pop open the LLM and just ask it the question, and it will give me my answer in 10 seconds. And so as the senior, I'm completely amplified. I can now do my job faster, more accurately, and with less staff overhead that I'm paying right there. Just with that, that's one small example.
So interesting, AI alignment is a big topic in the world. And how are we going to align the AI to our values? And every country has different values and everybody has different ideas on what this means. And if this particular group of people align their AI, it might be very different than another group of people aligning their AI. And then we get into this philosophical, what is objective moral values? And it just sort of turns into chaos. That aside, thousands of years of philosophical debate aside, practically today, current state, you mentioned lawyers. You mentioned it might be good for the corporations to have these sort of amplified seniors, but it might not be great for the firms, maybe in billable hours. I don't really know how it works, but you had mentioned that it might not be great for lawyers right now, but it might be good for corporations. Now, though, lawyers are going to be a big part of legislation and regulating AI in the future, or right now. So in other words, it's going to be lawyers who are going to be tasked with sort of figuring out the details of the regulation and working with the governments and what it means to say we're regulating AI. The question is this the fox guarding the hen house for the lawyers? Because will the lawyers sort of, even if it's subconsciously, sort of bias the legislation in favor of their own industry in this process, or would they be able to be objective? Or is it even bad if they have a bias? Is this even a problem? Because everybody has a bias. So why is it wrong for the lawyers to not have?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say the lawyers, most politicians went to law school, and the lawyers who choose to become politicians are maybe, a self-selecting sample that doesn't represent all of us. But with that being said, I think, you hit the nail on the head that bias is human, right? Bias is human. And also lawyers are conservative by nature. And when I say I don't mean politically conservative. I mean, they are cautious by nature, right? Cautious. And it's certainly been the case, again, taking my career as a small example, you referred to me as a tech evangelist earlier, that's a constant tug of war in the firm, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to just go head first into things, but there's a bit of a tug of war between other partners or our IT systems administrator, and it's good. Like, this is a good thing. I'm not complaining. I want that counterbalance, right? That, you know, with that, the more cautious conservative side of, we need to think twice about this, we need to ensure there's safeguards in place, et cetera. And so we certainly experience it in our firm. I'm sure other firms are too. And then I'm sure at the legislative level it's going to be the same thing. And yes, I can't imagine there wouldn't be some gatekeeping at the legislative level. It already exists, right? I mean, unlicensed practice of law is a thing. If I wasn't a lawyer, I can't take an LLM, and that's even if it's well trained and it could pass the bar exam, whatever. I can't take that and start selling my services to people if I'm not a licensed lawyer and saying, well, look, I got this LLM, it can pass the bar, so I'm good, right? Well, no, you're not. You have to have that license. You got to go through that regulatory process. So those sort of guardrails already exist. And I can't imagine that they're going to go down. If anything, they're going to have to get stricter, because now the various sort of holes in the armor from a regulatory perspective are that much higher, right? 20 years ago, if I'm not a lawyer and I decide I want to try to basically set up the equivalent of a law practice, yeah, it's illegal for me to do so, but I couldn't do so anyway, even if I wanted to. How would I do that? I wouldn't really be able to unless I try to, find some patsy to work for me who is a lawyer or something, right? Now, anybody can technically go get that, go use that LLM that can pass the bar and do it. So, if anything, the regulatory safeguards are probably going to get stricter. Is that a bias thing, or is that just prudence? Probably maybe a little of both. And I mean, on the issue of bias and the industry protecting itself, something I mentioned I'd come back to it earlier, is I think a lot of it depends on whether the billable hour remains the way lawyers get paid. So a big thing I've noticed in how AI is being sort of sold or advertised to the legal industry is how it can do things that the lawyer normally would have had to do themselves, right? And so we can go back to that example of the senior lawyer equipped with a good LLM is that much more powerful than other combinations. The issue is that you can't bill for the LLM's time, right? So if I am a senior lawyer and I have a junior lawyer who works for me, and we're a duo, Batman and Robin, and we're doing a lease or something, we're each billing that file, right? The billable hour is how lawyers get paid, right? And we're each tracking our time, and the client is paying for it at the end. And at the end of it, it might have taken, my junior 10 hours because they're the ones doing all the legwork. And then maybe I got 5 hours on the file from doing all the client management and sort of reviewing their work. 15 hours, bam. Let's say my rate's 1,000, theirs is 500. We've made some good money. Now, if I go and we take your example from earlier, Ryan, where I'm the senior with an LLM, maybe I still only got 5 hours of time on that file, and I've given the same deliverable to the client. I've given the same output. Yeah, I don't have as much overhead because I don't have to pay the junior out of my own pocket anymore, but I'm still going to make less profit that way, right? A big part of how lawyers make their money is not just if I'm a partner of a firm, it's not just my own time, my own billable rate. Yeah, partners have a higher billable rate, and that's great, but they're also making money from the junior lawyer. That's how we actually make our profit. That's how a law firm becomes scalable, is you have junior lawyers who work on a fixed salary. They often have bonus structures, but generally speaking, they're working on a fixed salary, maybe with a bonus. And all of the lift from the difference between their bill out rate to the client and what they actually make goes into the partner's pockets. That's how a law firm is structured, generally speaking. So if you take the juniors out of the equation and you're relying on M's instead, yes, you're reducing that overhead expense that you have as a partner, but you're overall going to make less money because you can't really bill as much. To circle back to the issue of gatekeeping in the legislation, is I think as long as lawyers using LLMs and using AI in their practice remains something that's not really into their revenue, it's making them more efficient. It's maybe empowering them in various ways, but it's not directly adding to revenue. In fact, it's taking away from revenue. That will be a big factor in the degree of gatekeeping that occurs. And as long as lawyers are still using the billable hour as the basis for how we get paid, I see those regulatory gates staying quite high.
It's fascinating. The whole entire organizational model sort of is being reimagined everywhere. And it's very interesting to hear about the legal part of this. We don't talk much about law, of course. We're engineering, data science, tech group. So this is absolutely fascinating to hear how this is all intersecting in law. And then you don't hear much about that either. So I would imagine there's probably ideas that lawyers have about like, what does this look like in 10 years? But you don't hear much about them because like you said, it might not be in their best interest to actually put forward sort of something that's reimagined. It might be better to go the other route and like, let's just sort of like regulate. Let's put up the strict barriers. And maybe that's good. Maybe for certain industries, this is just how it should be because of what you had mentioned earlier, high level corporate litigation that could cost potentially billions of dollars.
It's not my space. My parents are both in the medical field, so I have some visibility into it. But I know particularly with like imaging diagnostics, it's sort of a big area, right? With AI being able to analyze, MRIs and mammograms and whatever, and sort of catch early signs of whether it's cancer or, small tears like for orthopedics or what have you. And the AI is really a game changer in that industry. But how do you navigate that as a medical professional, right? Like, okay, maybe it's fine in that use case where it's sort of like an extra layer to catch stuff the radiologist doesn't catch. Sounds great there. But when it comes to, I don't know, figuring out how you're going to, the strategy to perform a particular type of surgery or, deciphering the patient's symptom or their complaints, the way they're vocalizing their symptoms and parsing that into a diagnosis, maybe you need, like, I don't want to trust AI to do that. I don't want ChatGPT to tell me, whether it's that mole is cancer or not. So and I think all of these high stakes industries, it's an exciting time, but also a very challenging time.
Fascinating.
And for that organizational structure, especially for a law firm, wouldn't you say that it's still protected by the idea of the continuity? I need juniors because those partners at some point, they might go somewhere else, etc. So I need to develop these skills. And as you said, not a lot, even clients like trust AI. Like if you go to a client and you tell them like, well, I'm running LLMs as juniors in my firm. As you said, it might take a lot of time for us to get to a point where your client even trusts that.
Yeah. I mean,
So
a
do you
lot of
think there is
juniors
at
are
least
behind
some
the scenes
protection?
anyway, right? Like maybe it's different. Every firm is different. Maybe even different regions do it differently. But for the most part, the juniors are sort of the silent majority in law that are behind the scenes, at the office at 11 o'clock at night while the partner's out at some fancy cocktail party schmoozing with the clients and they're back at the office doing the work. That's generally, again, hopefully none of my junior lawyers are listening to this, but that's generally, how it works. And most clients, like, they just see the partner. They know there's juniors doing the work, but they don't really care as long as they have that relationship with the partner. That's for the most part what they care about. And so you could probably sort of silently swap out a lot of juniors for LLMs. I mean, and not just junior lawyers, but staff too, even more so with like support staff that's really doing, more sort of busy work. Again, it comes down to that billable hour thing, right? Can you bill for it or not? If I can't bill for it, then I don't really have an incentive to swap out the junior who I can make a little bit of money off of for the LLM who I can't. As long as I have enough work volume from clients to, get enough billable hours out of that junior to cover their salary and give me a little bit of a lift, I'm better off with the junior, not an LLM. So what do you do, right? And I know this is something a lot of my partner on Succession, Wills, who's a software developer, has told me, this is a big thing in that industry as well, because their model is to charge by the hour for the most part in software development. And what you can build in an hour when you have Claude, even though he uses it all the time, right? He can code anything himself. He doesn't need it. But if he has Claude walking along with him as he builds something, it's that much faster and better and more effective. And because he has the skill set the pre-AI skill set to know what he's doing, he can use the AI in a responsible, effective way, in a way that, a teenager vibe coding in his parents' basement maybe can't. But at the end of the day, he can pump out, an entire platform, complicated app in a weekend that might have taken weeks or even months before, right? And if he's doing that for a client on a paid hourly basis, what do you do? What do you charge on based on what it actually took you, or do you charge it based on, the legacy? I forget the term that they're using in that industry. It's like the legacy rate or something like that, where it's basically like, this is how long it ought to have taken if I didn't have AI at my disposal. So that's what the client's going to pay versus here's how long it actually took me. That's sort of happening silently, I think, in many industries right now, including software development. The question becomes, can you do that in law? I don't know.
Yeah.
Technically, you can't, right? If you inflate your billable hours like that, it's a problem. You're going to get a knock on the door from the state bar or your law society, as we call them in Canada.
That makes sense.
That's
I
a
wanted
good.
to ask a question that is not related to tech, but from mentorship perspective. You're a senior partner, you have juniors. How did AI actually, well, it's tech related, I guess. How did AI affect that kind of relationship when you mentor your juniors? Because usually, like, at least I expect the same thing, just like engineering, where people come to you for like a tough question, tough problem, or just like a little bit of a hint of how to look for a solution. Now with AI coming in the picture, did you see any impact?
I'm probably a bad example for this because I have like, as I said, I practiced law in Canada and I moved to the US 2 years ago and I live in Florida. So I actually work largely remotely. I fly up there, once every 4 to 6 weeks to put in a few days at the office, remind people what I look like, whether they want that or not, probably not. But that probably gives me a very different perspective on what that mentorship relationship looks like. That said, I think I could safely speculate that I don't think it has affected it, to be quite honest with you. I think um, I think certainly remote work has affected it significantly. That's more of a, post COVID type of thing in
Impact,
terms of
yeah.
the whole new world of remote work and all of that. That is a very much affected the mentorship element of the industry. And that's an ongoing challenge for us is how do we bring up the junior lawyers who are, especially when they're fresh out of law school, and teach them the ropes if we're not in the same room. Right. And yeah, you can have Zoom calls and you can communicate, but there's a certain level of, and I think this is somewhat what you were touching on, there's a certain level of just that, walking by someone's office and asking a
Face to
question
face
or something in an
interaction.
informal way that, if
You don't have
when I'm in
anymore.
the office, my staff, the junior lawyers, they're coming in all the time. I get nothing done. It's actually quite ridiculous. When I go fly up to Canada for work, I actually get no work done for like the whole time I'm there because it's a lot of catching up and talking and everything. And that's when I sort of stack all of that mentorship. But it's when you're in person together, it's so much more natural for that to happen in sort of an
That makes
informal,
sense.
impromptu way versus, setting up a Zoom call to ask a question. As far as how AI might affect that, I think, yeah, you probably get a lot fewer of the sort of low level questions because they can just go ask the AI instead of asking the partner. But to be perfectly honest, a lot of partners, a lot of junior lawyers are trained pretty early on that you only go bug a partner with a question when you have absolutely tried to figure it
Used
out
every
by
path.
every means possible before you go bug them. Again, in law, time is money, right? If you're billing $1,000 an hour and if I'm billing $1,000 an hour, somebody takes 10 minutes of my time, that's $100 right there, right? So, or sorry, 6 minutes of my time is $100. So junior lawyers are trained that way early on. I think probably, yeah, there's fewer of those questions though, because now they have that additional tool to check before they resort to asking.
My question to follow up on that is maybe it's a little bit maybe provocative, but it would be 18-year-old Dave Rosati. Does 18-year-old Dave Rosati in 2020, let's just say it's 2026, does he go into law or does he go into tech? What would you do right now given the current state of everything? Which direction would you go today as an 18-year-old?
I would certainly, I think law school and having that credential is very valuable still. So let me preface it with that. To be able to know that I could lose everything tomorrow and I still have this, high barrier to entry, high skill credential that can get me, I'll never be unemployed. That is really good to have. Just, even having that in your back pocket while you're young and maybe trying your hand at entrepreneurial things that might, how many businesses out of 10 go bust, right? So you sort of have to go into it somewhat expecting that, and having that safety net, I think, is very, very valuable. And having specific skills to bring to the table in another industry. And for me, that's what I'm doing with Succession Wills, right? Is I have this love and interest in tech, in AI. I have an entrepreneurial zest and ambition. I want to build something. It's not for money. If I want to make more money, I'm better off going and just doubling down on my law practice, right? How many tech startups make it big? But for me, it's a passion project. It's about building something and marrying the two, the tech, the love of tech with the legal knowledge. So, I mean, if I would go into it today, I would certainly still get the law degree. I would certainly still do the training. I probably would not go into private practice though. If I really have to honestly answer your question, would I do it the same way? I probably would.
I agree. Actually, people are actually surprised with me agreeing because my pedigree would be people like, oh, you seem to be, wouldn't you be for the disruption? Wouldn't you be for against the credentialing? And I actually am for it in the sense that fundamentals, like you mentioned, the law degree and mathematical fundamentals, statistical fundamentals, engineering fundamentals, these things persist through the ages. So in other words, if you sort of disregard all the fundamentals and the foundational buildings of knowledge and you just jump into these sort of synthetic, sort of quick answers, it's a very superficial career. And I think people should train themselves in foundational thinking, which means go through a path of getting some serious credentials and learn those foundations, because like you said, someone that understands the foundations of engineering and statistics and mathematics and law or medicine or whatever will always be okay.
And they're more powerful at their job too. Like, again, I'll take my partner at Succession is the example I gave earlier, that his ability to create software and that is powerful and to do it quickly is on a whole other level from the kid in his parents' basement vibe coding. And yes, somebody without any coding background or computer science background can now do some pretty cool stuff by vibe coding with AI. It's pretty awesome. But the person who does have those fundamentals, who does understand what all of this actually means, is so much more powerful. So much more powerful. It's like, back in high school when you're learning complex arithmetic or calculus or whatever, and you ask the teacher, why do I have to learn this stuff? I'm always going to have a calculator and Excel. What do I need to learn this stuff for? Well, it's because by understanding, even though, yeah, you might never after high school have to run one of these calculations or arithmetical equations ever again. But because you went through the process of learning it and going through it at least the once, it imparts a certain, not only understanding of what's going on, but it trains a certain way of thinking and a certain way of how you attack things that is essential to using those tools, whether it's AI or whether it's, to take that old example, just having an old fashioned calculator. Using that tool effectively is amplified by having those background credentials and that education.
Agree. Absolutely. And you talked about Succession Wills. So maybe a good segue into the gap you've seen in the industry. But talk about the gap you mentioned. So Succession Wills is dealing with a gap that you see in the industry, and I think a lot of people can relate to this gap. I know I can when we talked earlier about the product. Talk about the gap that you saw, and then go into how the product is going to solve it and help people that are in similar situations.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm not just a wills and estates lawyer. I'm more of a general business lawyer. I've never to the extent I've done wills and estates in my law practice, it's always been more of like, I have all these clients who I do business work and contract work and transactional work for, and inevitably the issue of their estate planning and their wills come up. And I sort of, I've always done them my whole career. At any given time, I always have several open will files, but it's in that sense. It's not like I'm out there just trying to pump out, mom and pop wills day in, day out. So, it's an area of law I find very interesting. It's an area of law I have a lot of experience in, but not necessarily like, oh, I have this, huge passion for wills specifically. Rather, it was a matter of seeing that it was the best use case where I could take my legal knowledge and take that passion for tech and put them together. So I mentioned early in my career, I had created, sort of cobbled together my own automations for various different types of legal documents and things that we would produce. None of those presented themselves to me as being as ripe of a case of something that other people might be interested in outside of the firm, other than other law firms that would be our competitors. They're all more, you still need the lawyer, you still need that, that more heavy gatekeeping. There's a lot of nuance from file to file. And when it came to all these other types of legal documents I was doing with wills, however, I found that there was a bit more of a rinse and repeat going on in the legal profession than with some of this other stuff. And there was a little less need for the gatekeeping. Don't get me wrong. When it comes to high net worth individuals, people with complicated situations like, children from previous marriages and things like that, they absolutely should be using a lawyer to do their will and their estate planning, 100%. But the reality is that like 95% of people don't fit that bill. Like 95% of people have, spouse, kids, they have a house, they got a car, they got some investments in the bank, they got a, 401k or whatever, and they want to leave everything to their kids, or they want to leave everything to their spouse. And then when both the parents are gone, they want everything to go to the kids equally. That's like 95% of wills. And the reality is that lawyers are expensive, and go to a lawyer to do your will is going to cost you, if you go to a cheap one, maybe you can get away with, somewhere between 500 and $1,000. But, most legit lawyers, bigger firms, you're going to be paying, well into the 4 digits. And so the gap I saw there was, this is something that only needs that real, that human in the loop side of it is only really, really important in a small percentage of cases. And most people just don't need all that. Most people's wills are fairly rinse and repeat and simple. And at the same time, you have this problem where I think the statistic is something like roughly 70% of people don't have a will. That's a multifactorial problem. There's a few reasons for that. It's not pleasant to think about your mortality. There are hard emotional decisions sometimes in the process of figuring out what you're going to do in your will. So there's a few factors at play there, but certainly cost is one of them. And so if I could put a dent in that, because passing away without a will is a very bad thing. Absolutely do not want that. Aside from the possibility of assets going, to the government, or things not being structured well so that at least the government is taking more of a share of taxes than they ought to. Aside from all that, there's also, the possibility of dispute after you pass away. The last thing you want is for your kids or your grandkids or whoever to be fighting over stuff after you pass away. And I can't tell you the number of cases I've seen where, perfectly harmonious families that get along great, siblings that get along great, et cetera, thing stands a better chance of messing that up than, an estate litigation over a parent or a rich aunt or uncle or something like that. So dying without a will, very bad idea. 70-something% of people don't have a will. To get one costs a lot of money and involves, very few cases really need that, that serious lawyer knowledge and nuance. So that was the gap I saw. And I decided I'm going to build it. I'm going to build something that addresses this, not just for not just for a business, but to actually address a problem. At the end of the day, an access to justice problem. If 70% of people don't have a will, that's a problem that should be solved or at least worked on. And I wanted to make that happen. That's the why.
And Dave, from competition perspective, thank you for explaining the problem scope and where you see the gap. Now you have competition right there that most probably some of them are been there for multiple years. And with a flavor of a wizard that people just fill out a huge form. So what do you add to the experience that makes people more comfortable saying like I'm willing to go through this experience and do this through Succession Wells?
So yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, it's a somewhat novel space. It's not like there's a ton of options out there, but we're not the only ones. First thing I did, of course, was check out the competition before I got too far down this road. And what I found was that there's a lot of bells and whistles on the front end. Very, very slick websites. They have all the trust badges affiliated with this bank, or they have these financial advisory firm vouching for them, et cetera, et cetera. They've obviously put a lot of money into building up their marketing side of things. But when I would actually go and buy pay for the subscription or the membership, whatever, and actually test it out, once you got at least with somebody with eyes for this who knows what they're looking at, when I would get through all the bells and whistles to the actual legal document at the end of the day, I found that it was not up to par for any of them. A lot of the customization is a bit illusory. So yeah, they ask a lot of questions as you go through that wizard process. But at the end of the day, the actual legal document is largely just taking your answers and sort of filling in placeholders. So a key thing I wanted in mind, and my partner, who's the software developer, was going to kill me at one point over this, is that the logic that's built into the document is very sophisticated in terms of, when you answer a certain way to a given question, it's going to change multiple elements of the will. It's not just going to fill in a blank with your answer, right? It's going to, if you do have kids versus if you don't have kids, whole entire sections of your will need to look different, right? And that was the sort of level of logic branching and customization that I wanted to achieve. That was my first goal. And this was pretty early on. This is sort of before the AI explosion of the last few years. At the time, I remember writing an article that was super anti-AI in this space of why you don't want AI anywhere near your will, and why succession wills is great because this is all, through pain and sweat and blood and tears. Every line of this thing has been human coded to be the way it needs to be. What hallucination, no drift, et cetera. That was my stance once upon a time. And that's still my stance. But the other area that sets us apart from the competition is that another gap I found was how can we use AI responsibly? I haven't checked it out in a little while. I don't know if any of the competition have started to implement any AI beyond, a simple chat support bot that every website has. What I set out to do was emulate the other half of the lawyer experience. So if you come to my office to do your will, there's two components from me as the lawyer. There's two components to that job, to that case. The first is the intake, right? I'm going to sit down with you. We're going to talk. I'm going to ask you questions about yourself, and we're going to have a conversation. You're going to give me answers. In my mind, you're going to give me your answers in your language, the way, you're thinking about it. And I'm going to ask you sort of prodding questions and solicit what I need out of you. But in my mind, as the trained lawyer, I'm sort of mapping that in the back end to what does that actually mean from like a legal perspective? Like what is, you say, oh, I want my brother to take care of everything for my kids after I'm gone. Well, to me, that means, okay, brother equals executor or estate trustee or personal representative. The terminology varies by jurisdiction. So that's one element. The other element is the actual drafting of the will. Now I have all my information from my little interview with you, and I'm going to go back to my desk and, with my junior lawyer, whatever, we're going to take our basic template and then modify it and customize it and give you your will. So what all the other will builders out there are doing is just that second part, right? They're putting the user through a wizard, asking the user fill out a bunch of forms, questionnaires, and drop-down menus, et cetera. And then they're generating the will. So they're doing the second part, they're doing the drafting that the lawyer does, but they're expecting the user or the client in the traditional sense to sort of already know the answers and know what it all
understand the
means.
lingo too.
Yeah, exactly. And don't get me wrong, they are, They're user friendly. They are pretty intuitive. There's lots of, drop downs and whatever. And, a savvy, intelligent person who's, and who's good with reading too, can make their way through. But it's nevertheless a sort of a cold process. You could imagine you come to my office to do your will as your lawyer, and I just hand you a questionnaire and I sit there while you fill it out. And I only answer specific questions when you pose them to me, and I don't give you anything back. It wouldn't be a very good experience. So the way I wanted to implement AI was to address that half of the equation, right? The conversational, getting you as the user to think about the issues you ought to think about and sort of poke and prod you to pose those questions, the right questions to yourself, to do it in a language you can understand, to be able to answer questions in a back and forth kind of way in
You're
real time.
definitely, yeah, you're definitely building a very smart translation layer. Again, the
Exactly.
idea of the lingo.
Translation is exactly what it is. But the beauty of it, and this comes back to what we were talking about earlier about using AI responsibly, is AI never touches the pen. Is the phrase I use. As in, all the AI is doing, the AI is trained on our will builder, like on the back end, and it's trained on knowing your mission to the AI is you need to get answers to these questions. You need to gather these inputs from the user, and you need to do so in a way that the user can follow and can understand. That's all the AI is doing. It's just mapping the inputs. The inputs are then going into our pre-established will builder that is generating the will with the fully, lawyer approved code. So there's no ability for hallucination or drifting or any of that in the drafting that you might get. For instance, if you went to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write your will for you, that would be a very different process. And that's the polar opposite of what we were going for. We're trying to use the AI as a helpful, intelligent interpreter or translator between the user speaking colloquially and conversationally and our app that's working on the back.
So
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
definitely, yeah,
neurosymbolic design is what you might call that. Academics might get into the weeds of what neurosymbolic means, but you're essentially the best of both worlds. You're using the best of the rules and the logic of your domain knowledge expertise plus the power of the connectionist systems.
Too. So it's a toggle. Like literally, you're on the will builder, and you can toggle between. We call it the AI legal assistant. You could toggle between that and the traditional wizard based approach because if you do know what you're doing and you just want to get it done, you can still do it that way, the same way all the competition does, the traditional way of just zipping through the tabs in the wizard. Or if same thing here is, if you've already built your will and it's 5 years later and you want to change something, you probably don't want to go through that whole AI process again. You just want to pull up your old will, make a few tweaks, and pump out the new one. With us, you can do that. You don't need to use the AI. The AI is a tool. It's an option, and that brings me to another element of, I think, what sets us apart is we have a lifetime access policy. This goes back to what I said earlier about 70% of people not having a will and that being a multifactorial problem. Setting aside costs, like if we were selling wills for $1, we would still get a very high abandonment rate. It's estimated that all those other will builders out there, the online will builders, they have super high abandonment rates. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but some large percentage of people will sign up. They have every intention of doing their will. They sign up, they go on to do it. They get through the first few steps of the process and then they quit. Why do they quit? Again, multifactorial problem. They're unpleasant to think about your mortality, etc. But we talked about cost earlier. Another factor, in my view, is that certain decisions are very tough to make. Who's going to, I might know that I want all of my stuff to go to my 2 kids equally. That's an easy question maybe for me. But the question of who is going to be their guardian, who's going to watch them if something happens to me and my wife, well, that's a harder question, right? Is it my parents? Is it my wife's parents? Do we go with a sibling, because our parents are getting older? Much harder question. What I wanted to avoid, and those tough questions, I know it from experience doing people's wills, those tough questions prevent people from finishing the process because they might have 90% of the questions that they need to figure it out, but that last 10% is holding them back from being able to cross the finish line. I saw that as another reason another way we could tackle this 70% of people don't have a will problem. Because if we could show people that, perfect is the enemy of good here, right? If you know everything else that you needed to answer to do your will, and that guardianship question example is the only thing outstanding, and you're going to now take that back and it's going to take you months and you're going to forget about all this and procrastinate, then don't do that. Finish the will now with what you have, sign it, and you can come back and add to it and amend it anytime you want. And that way we won't let perfect be the enemy of good. We won't let a few hard questions or the fact that you're, tight on time right now because you wanted to get your will done quickly before you go on this big international trip, or, you're going to have surgery next week or something, right? Just get it done. Get it done, cover the important stuff. And with us, and this comes back to this lifetime access thing with us, the idea was if we can offer people lifetime access, if we could say you're not buying a will, you're buying access to this platform, to this estate planning platform. And we're still new. We're just launching this January. So there's a lot still to be built. And we have a lot of ideas of how we want to expand this, not just to be a will builder, but to be more of a go-to platform for your estate planning and dealing with all of this stuff, not just writing the will. So what you're buying with us is not a will. You're buying access to that platform so that you can at any time come back and refine that will, add to it, amend it over time, whatever you need to do, and treat that will as more of a living, breathing document or repository that you are keeping an eye on. It's not a one-time set it and forget it kind of thing, and 20 years goes by and you never deal with it again. With us, we wanted to make it lifetime access, encourage people, just get it done and come back later, come back often, and make sure it's still up to date, refine it, add to it as you change your mind on things or what have you.
That's the big differentiator, the dynamic nature of the will, because like you mentioned, those are tough decisions. So it's like if I have to go into the will and I have to think about every difficult decision in my life and all this death and chaos, and I have to like work through all this in 10 minutes and then submit it. And then if I want to make one change, I'm talking about it going through the normal process. I got to spend $500 or $1,000 to go talk to a lawyer. But you know what? I actually want to give my grandson something. I want to make sure my grandson gets the car. He always loved my Mustang that I worked on for 30 years in the garage. He's the only one that loved it. I want to make sure he gets that. I got to spend $1,000 to go make this one change. So I think absolutely the dynamic nature, selling it as a dynamic sort of living document rather than like, no, this is immutable unless you give us another $500. I think then the conversion rates on the wills will go up and you'll see that KPI, your 60-70% sort of shrink. And I think that's absolutely noble. So many families end up in these situations with surprises and things aren't worked out and then the fighting, and it's very disruptive to families not to have these things sorted out ahead of time.
It comes not just from not having a will, but not updating the will, because, you just painted a picture of, okay, well, I have a will. I'm mostly, I got most of the bases covered, but I would ideally like to make this one change or this one tweak, but it's going to cost me $500 to go call up the lawyer. It's going to cost me $1,000. I'm not going to do it. That can be just as disruptive, if not even more disruptive. Actually, in my experience, is probably even more problematic in terms of creating family strife and estate litigation is out of date wills, as opposed to not having a will is bad. Having an out of date will is even worse, because you're leaving everything to your ex-wife, and your current wife is not going to be too happy about it, or something like that. So it comes back to that lifetime access. Treat it like a living document. It should be easy. It shouldn't be unpleasant, and it's something you can get it done. And importantly too, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier about some of our expansion plans for down the road, is we want to be your go-to place so that not only you know where to find your will, but everybody knows where to find it. A big part of the process that people don't really think too much about is writing the will is half the equation. Actually administering it, that is carrying out your wishes that the will states, is the other half of the equation, and can be very, very difficult for the people you leave behind. If you haven't been organized about where do I find the bank accounts, what are the account numbers, what are the passwords, et cetera. There's so much to it for your loved ones to be able to sort of step into your shoes and carry out those wishes from your will. And that's the part a lot of people don't think about. And oftentimes it's as simple as they don't even know where to find the will, right? You went to some lawyer 20 years ago and it's in some filing cabinet at the lawyer's office. They don't even know where to find it. So we aim to be, and again, this is something we're building towards because we're so new, but we aim to be more of a go-to repository for all of this stuff. The ability to push a copy of your will out to the person you named as your personal representative so that they know that they've got that important job and they have a copy. Being able to do that in a frictionless way where you can sort of just push push a PDF to them via email directly from the platform. It's not just convenient, it's important. It's important that they have access to the information that they're going to need to have access to.
Business wise, definitely an interesting choice. As Ryan was mentioning, there is a noble side of it. But just to talk about from the product side, as you said, like there's a lot of ideas, a lot to extend on. And do you think at some point that will um, um, affect you guys from growth perspective, like that it's that lifetime access fixed pricing? Because I can see this, this is why I'm asking the question, because one of the things that you mentioned, which is, let's say you're choosing a guardian for your children, this is something that some people pause on, like saying like, okay, I'm going to stop here and go talk to that person that would accept such a responsibility, right? I think that's what happens. And this is where I believe there was a lot of features that come in. I'm thinking like AI can help actually, like how do you guide such a conversation with that person that you want to be the guardian, etc. So the experience can expand really well, and there is a lot of features. So do you think it would limit you, or do you feel like I'm looking at it from the noble side, and I also look at it as that sufficiently I'm good with my growth at the beginning, and then maybe that would change in the future?
Well, certainly we're taking it one step at a time. Myself and my partner both have other business, other projects, other sources of income. So we're not completely dependent on this, and maybe that's why we're not being driven quite as much by the fiscal planning side of it. But yes, you raise a good point, a point we've certainly thought of. One reason why we talk about growing beyond just being a will builder. The will builder kit, the formula for that, the structure, the model for that can stay as is. And there's other ways in which we can offer value that could have different pricing models or what have you over time. But that core will builder, hopefully one day is more of just a gateway into a larger world, right? And that gateway, we certainly have we are striving to keep that the way it is. And I'll just give an example. I've given some examples of some of the areas in which we're planning on expanding the offering. Another very simple one is, and we already have a working alpha on this, is something we call a Succession Wills Pro,
I was
which
going to just
is,
ask you about this. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Please.
and that's a CRM for lawyers. It is taking the underlying will builder, architecture, software, whatever you want to call it, and wrapping it up in a CRM for lawyers to use, and frankly, for other professionals to use as well, to manage their estate planning clients, their estate planning files, to keep things organized, to, as I said, push documents out to people in a easy way. And it has the will builder sort of built in among many other features, but the will builder is in there too. So, among other things, it's expediting their drafting. And it sort of circles right back to where we started in this conversation, which is tech and AI in the legal space. How is it disrupting things? How is it being used? How can we use it effectively? There's a great example, right? Is with something like Succession Wills Pro, I can now run a wills and estates practice where I'm using this software to keep track of all my files, keep track of my documents, use as a storage for documents, generate automatically the various documents, schedule things, et cetera. It's all, again, it's something we're building, but that's a great example. And obviously that would be a subscription-based model. So in an ideal world, the public will builder, the one where we're trying to be noble, as you say, my hope is that at the end of the day is just an entry point for people. And from a business perspective, there's so many other ways we can add value, whether it's on the consumer side or on the professional side.
And it drives the B2B side, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, we would love to, our goal is to become a full ecosystem. If you're a lawyer using Succession Wills Pro, it's something we have on our I believe it's on the site already, but it's something, again, we're still building, is, a lawyer connection platform. So again, coming back to that abandonment rate issue, a lot of the competition, a lot of this online will builder industry, there's a very high abandonment rate. People they sign up, they start the process, they don't finish. I talked about how the AI is one way to address that by, sort of making the process easier for people and less intimidating. I talked about the lifetime access being a way to address that because, they don't have to let perfect be the enemy of good. Another way is a lot of people, they start the process online. They think, yeah, I can do this online. I don't need a lawyer. I don't want to spend $1,000. They start and then they realize they're in over their heads. And we're pretty confident that with our system, anyone can do it. Anyone can get through it. It's as simple, it's intuitive, especially with the AI, but totally understandable that at the end of the day, you might just not want to do this on your own. You might decide halfway through, you know what, I really want to have a lawyer look at this. And so with the Lawyer Connect or Succession Connect platform we're building within our ecosystem, the goal is that if you're a lawyer using Succession Wills Pro or you otherwise want to, partner up with us, you'll be listed on there. And basically, for any users who start the process of the DIY, the do it themselves will builder, and decide along the way that they want to use a lawyer after all, well, you know what? Here's a directory of vetted, responsible lawyers who we've vetted them. We know that this is within their wheelhouse. Here's their pricing, and we can connect you right with them and try to make that process as frictionless as possible for the user. Our goal in that situation is if they've already paid for Succession Wills, like for our app, that'll be credited. We'll have a deal with the lawyers that'll be credited off their bill with the lawyers, so the user won't be out anything. And again, it adds to the ecosystem. It'll let the B2B Succession Pro and the B2C, our main Succession Wills app, sort of feed each other. And at the end of the day, it's helping the lawyers bring in business. It's helping the consumers actually get to where they need to get in a cost-effective way, and with some helping guidance. And again, it comes back to we want to solve this problem. We certainly want to be successful and make some money along the way, but we want to solve this problem, and we see the way to achieve both of those goals is to become that ecosystem.
That makes sense. Out of curiosity, how proactive can Succession Wells be? I'm just curious. Like right now, you see how like credit history, everything shows up financially of what's happening, and some app pops you up saying like, "Hey, I saw that you have another credit account opened, etc." How much of public, I guess, personal news, whether it's like you bought a new car or now you own another home, etc., you can actually make Succession Wills so proactive to pop up and say, "Hey, you should update your will. I know you got new stuff coming in," etc.
I mean, it's certainly something we want. It's a balancing act, right? Because obviously people are protective of their privacy, and they should be. Also, people are busy and don't necessarily have time to go updating their app and updating everything constantly. So to some degree, it's got to be led by the users. It's got to be led by the people of what they want to do. In an ideal world, that is where, hey, yeah, you just bought a new car or you just moved to a different state. That's a big one, because wills are state specific.
Mhm.
Obviously, divorce is a big one as well. So yeah, I would love to get that proactive. It's something we're going to have to sort of feel out and see
Oh,
where the users take us, because we have to balance that with people's privacy. So
yeah, definitely a research point. I was just curious because it's like you get a divorce and after like 2 weeks, like, "Hey, you need to update your will." That would
but
be
you mean
interesting.
from us, from like a targeting perspective?
Yeah. It's just to be
Yeah.
proactive, like come back to Succession Wells.
Oh yeah, that's pretty good actually. I'm not savvy enough to think of things like that, but I'll have to use that. Yeah, no, it's a good point. You're absolutely right. From like a marketing perspective, it probably would be an intelligent strategy to keep an eye on the divorce court in your county and ring up everybody who just got a divorce within the last 30 days. They should probably get their wills done. Yeah.
And like you said, the moving. So like Florida, like you're in Florida, it's very transient. A lot of people moving to Florida. So like that would be like a marketing group, like getting the people that have moved. Hey, have you updated your will? You're now in Florida. So there's a lot of these sort of leading indicators of will will changes you could sort of look into and market, and you're sort of building predictive models about your customer base. Or it's like, if I plug in these 7 attributes, it's going to tell me some sort of likelihood if they should be changing their will or not. So you can get sort of into the classic data science and machine learning and the marketing part of this too, like
Yeah.
Rabia was alluding to.
And again, that's the part that where I'm really, I'm really green, right? When it comes to the marketing side, that's the part I'm still learning. Again, I set out to build something useful and that works well. And now I'm navigating the joyous process of finding, getting it in people's ears and finding the right people for it.
There's another angle to wills too that, like we talked about what happens if you have a outdated will, which is more problematic than if you have no will at all. So there's also this sort of resolution or sort of thing about these. But I guess it could go the other way. I guess you could write a will that maybe purposely triggers people.
Gets people mad. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, it's not. I mean, certainly in my personal experience, when somebody finishes the process, at least in the historical sense of as their lawyer in the boardroom or what have you, and they sign it, they always walk out with real, like what you've just alluded to, a real sense of a weight off their shoulders. They've accomplished something they've known for a long time. It's something they needed to get done, and it's finally done. And it brings a sense of relief and accomplishment, 100%.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, that's what it is. It's not
Yep.
the difficult. There are difficult decisions in these things. Those primarily occur around guardianship of kids for obvious reasons, and the remarried families. That's where you get a lot of the harder stuff, right? When you have kids from a previous marriage, and that's, I don't know what the percentage is. I was about to throw 90%, but it's the vast majority of the difficulty and in turn the contention and issues that arise are from those situations.
Yep. Which makes sense with that abandonment number, where people get into these difficult questions. And like what you said, Rabia, was that like usually when you run into these questions, you then go and talk to people. These are all difficult conversations. So it makes sense that there's a lot of high abandonment in these cases.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can talk and maybe, again, it's all from the noble side, but I think it's also marketing in a way, which is to open up a door for the guardian to actually come and educate themselves what a guardian does on your platform. And then that could open a door for them to actually start their own will. So it's pretty
That's
interesting how that
why,
can go.
yeah, that's exactly why we have a lot of bigger picture plans, but something much more immediate is, and this will of course be optional for the user because privacy and all that, but they will have the option that whoever they've named as the guardian, whoever they've named as the executor or the personal representative, etc., that in our platform they'll be able to enter that person's contact information and actually notify them, like one-click notification. And that person, obviously, they'll be able to opt out and unsubscribe, of course, but for their information, they'll not only be notified of that they've been named in this important role in their friends or their loved ones' will, but it'll come with the necessary education for them. And obviously from us, from a marketing perspective, hey, we've just got another potential lead essentially who maybe they need a will too, right?
Definitely.
In marketing, email addresses are gold.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So rapid fire round, short questions. Monday morning, suit and tie or tech founder hoodie?
Gym clothes.
Gym clothes. Be honest. Do you actually read the terms and conditions when you update your iPhone?
No, I don't even read. I wouldn't even read a lease for my own apartment. I just, the way I approach it with clients is very different from my own. Don't do as I say, not as I do.
Makes sense. I love this one, the jargon ban. If you could ban one Latin phrase from the legal profession forever, like pro bono, what would it be?
So it actually would not be a Latin phrase. There's a habit that there's a lawyer way of speaking that drives me absolutely off the wall. If you've ever gotten a email or a letter from a lawyer where they use the word same, you ever seen that? They use same, but in not like correct English. So they'll reference something and then they'll subsequently reference same. And it's this weird lawyer speak thing that breaks all the rules of English, makes no sense, and drives me nuts. So that would be it.
I have one that, like, I know you're not like you haven't done a lot of them like for individuals, but it's like funny. A client asks you to add a clause to delete my browser history upon death. Do you put it in the way?
First, I educate them about incognito mode, and then I put it in.
That's a good one. Which one is harder to defend in court? A complex corporate merger or a Florida man headline?
Oh, Florida man headline, 100%. 100%. As long as I don't
All
become one, I'll be okay.
right. Without naming names, what is the strangest item you've ever seen someone try to leave to beneficiary in a
I know the client. I'm thinking of the client because he was crazy. I know it was, I think we went through, most people go through like, you know, a couple of drafts, 2, 3 drafts of back and forth with their will. This guy was like 20 drafts and made me, this is when I was a junior. I had to go to his house. It was Christmas Eve, incidentally. We go to this guy's house, and this is Canada. It was a snowstorm on Christmas Eve to sign his will because it had to be done that day for some reason. Maybe he was going to hold back kids' Christmas presents or something if it wasn't signed first. So unfortunately, I cannot remember what it was. All I remember is he was the most, yeah, he was a little nuts. So I'm sure he put some pretty wacky stuff in his.
It tells also what a junior goes through.
Yeah, long nights in the basement and snowstorm drives on Christmas Eve. Sounds about right.
So if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing about the legal system, cost, speed, complexity, which one goes?
Perspective as a lawyer trying to make money, or from the perspective of the client?
Good question. Let's do both. Let's do from the system. Fix it for the system for the client first, and let me know from lawyer perspective.
Well, the two are sort of, they're mutually exclusive. They go against each other. For me, trying to make more money, probably the billable hour. I talked about it earlier. Probably the billable hour is the thing I would get rid of. It makes it difficult as a business to scale, right? The more you want to earn more, you got to work more, right? I'm working this week because it's the last week of the fiscal year. And hey, I'm going to get in more hours while I still can. And it's between Christmas and New Year's. I should be, on the couch playing video games with my kids or something. That billable hour creates that incentive to always work that and affects scalability to some extent. That's why personal injury firms are so big, right? That's why when you see those billboards of those huge multi-state firms, Morgan and Morgan or whatever, the reason they can do that is because personal injury is basically the only area of law, maybe not the only one, but the main area of law where they charge on contingency, right? That means that if they don't win, they don't make money, but if they do win, they take a percentage of the earnings. That, like a real estate agent or a private equity firm that they
More
charge a
scalable.
percentage, right? They have a stake in it. It makes it so it's more scalable. The rest of the areas of law generally don't have that. We work on a billable hour, and it's the bane of my existence. At the same time, lawyers making more money is probably the biggest problem when it comes to the system. I can't tell you the number of times I have to tell a client, no, yeah, you're right, but there's nothing we could do about it because there's only X number of dollars at stake, and you're going to spend that much in legals in the first 3 months. So let it go. And people can get away with, but not with murder,
Not
but
worth it.
with financially, people can get away because it's just not worth it to go after them. It's just the system. It takes too long. It's too costly, et cetera. I don't know how to fix that because the system is run by highly educated people who, it's a supply and demand thing. A lawyer can charge $1,000 an hour because people pay $1,000 an hour. It's a free market thing, just like anything else. How do you fix that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I agree. Well, that was pretty awesome, Dave. Honestly, it was a very enjoyable conversation. I never talked to anybody who's in between legal and AI and technology. So that was really fun. And thank you for joining us this time too, because I know it's like family time right now. So I really appreciate it, bro.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on. You were very easy to talk to. I was a little unsure what to expect, and you guys made it really easy. I appreciate it.
Yep. It should come easy because you're a domain knowledge expert. The expertise is what drives the conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time again, Dave. Thank you so much. And hopefully once you guys like even more successful, you come back and tell us about how
Yeah.
it went.
All the new features.
Very enjoyable
right.
conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Hey,
Enjoy. Happy New Year.
Happy New
Thank
Year.
you.
Bye, guys.
Happy New Year.
Farabi Innovations.